Silver Defender asks, oh yeah, this is from earlier and it's a great question. Silver Defender says, from all the stories tackled on MythBusters, what's the one you feel perfectly defined what the show was about and why? I'm going to give an answer that you probably know, and it's Lead Balloon. Lead Balloon, more than any other episode, typifies the best parts for us about making the show and the best parts about the show itself, I think. Specifically because of the fact that it is a totally pointless exercise. It's not like succeeding at making this balloon out of lead is answering some important question that people have. Certainly it should be feasible to take a sheet material and build an enclosure that one could call a balloon. But in the execution of this ridiculous question comes a ton of really, really sensitive and refined engineering. And that's science. Answering questions that might seem absurd on their face and learning not just about the question, but in executing how to answer the question, learning a ton along the way. And so just to give, and I've told this story before, but like just to give some context, lead balloon was, it's the idiomatic phrase. And this is us like, we'd gone through all the urban legends in the first couple of seasons of the show, and idiomatic phrases like Stitch in Time saves 9, which we never did. Watch pot never boils, which we never did. But idiomatic phrases struck us as fruitful territory. And lead balloon, like the band title Led Zeppelin, that's what they were told. Oh yeah, your band's going to go over like a lead balloon, which is why they called it that. Pointless on its face. And we resisted that story. Like I said about getting the foils, it took a long time to get it. There was a lot of push-pull between Jamie and I. But the moment the right foil showed up, Jamie, who had been cranky about this story, and I was the one that felt more confident that it would go. He was like, I'm really just not sure. The first lead showed up, and he and I were both like, put on gloves and we're handling it. And I just watched it slot into his brain. Oh, this is doable. And then he was along for the ride. Hook, line, and sinker. The other thing about that story was when we broke it, when we like outlined how that story was going to go and sent it to editorial in Australia, their estimate was that it would come out at a 30-minute story, 25-minute story, maybe a secondary story, a B story, not an A story. And it ended up cutting as an A story. And not only that, it ended up rating really well. And this was also what was great, because big truck driving by, when it rated really well, Discovery, they noticed that stuff. And so they end up listening next time you explain, listen, this is going to be more like lead balloon than cement truck. Yeah. And I am prouder of my engineering in that build. That is some of my favorite engineering, coming up with how to assemble a cube balloon while moving only triangles and squares along a flat so that you don't over torque any part of the material that you're using. That is some of my favorite engineering. But I really do think that's like one of our all-time best episodes. All right, did that. R. Wilson wants to know, how did it feel when you finally got whip training? Also, will you make another whip sometime soon? I don't have plans to make another whip sometime soon, although it's certainly feasible. I loved making whips. I have loved making whips. And for our Indiana Jones MythBusters special, we brought in Whip Master Anthony DeLonges, who has trained everybody from Harrison Ford to Michelle Pfeiffer how to crack whips, and he's amazing at it. In fact, there's a particular kind of whip he prefers to the standard Indy bull whip, which has a much longer handle to it, and it's a thinner whip, and gives him much more precision in cracking. And sometimes you can find those whips on eBay, and they'll even be called a DeLongis whip. He's a wonderful teacher. He teaches the physicality of the whip. He keeps on asking you just to watch how little he's doing. Because a whip is basically a machine for transferring and magnifying a waveform. And it's thick at one end, so the waveform is slow, and then it thins out, so that waveform gets faster and faster and faster until, crack, it breaks the speed of sound. And DeLongis, I swear, could put out all the candles in a candelabra. It's shocking watching him go. Somebody gave me a beautiful whip at the Brisbane Comic-Con that I was at in Australia recently, and backstage I was in this big open space, and I can only reliably do one whip crack without practice, and it's the full over the head whack. And honestly, you need hearing protection. And I was in this hotel ballroom. It was so spectacularly loud. It was delightful working with Anthony DeLongis. He's a terrific teacher of whips. So one more? All right, let's see here. Blake asks, are there any myths looking back you really wish you had current 3D printing capabilities for? Oh my God, so many. So many. We never used 3D printing for the show. I mean, we maybe used it a couple of times in some very small ways. We might not have even called it out. But the fact is that the failure mode for 3D printers was such that in production, which is now 9 years ago is when we wrapped production. So if I had a room full of bamboo carbon X1s while making the show, man, there would be a lot of 3D printing in the episodes. And it would show up a lot in the scaled experiments. 3D printing would have allowed us to do some really refined scaled experiments by making the cars the right size for the person. We wouldn't have to go find action figures of the right size, all that kind of stuff. But also valving water valves, air valves, that would have been, we could have added so much functionality to our testing procedures, both from an engineering standpoint and visually. One thing that, now that MythBusters is on all 14 seasons and the specials are all on Max right now, but they're also on Pluto, one of Paramount's properties. And if you watch the early episodes versus the later episodes, you will notice very specifically an increase over time of the bright arrows, colored arrows and lines and labels on things. And that all grew out of a goal of mine from a producing standpoint of making sure that every camera, as best we could, told the story of what was going to happen in that camera when you looked at the shot. And that was sort of to make the audience's job easier at understanding what we were doing. And 3D printing would have allowed so much more of even that. Good God, brackets. So many little ways it could have helped. But we don't have a time machine yet. And so sadly, we made it without 3D printers. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a tested member. I know, everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the Tested membership has become such an important part of the Tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the Tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.